Hello everybody, my name is Caitlin and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror here, and I wanted to come on and give a quick review of the new film Barbarian, which is being released I believe on September 9th. I was able to go to a preview screening of this film this past week and I'm going to be giving a brief non-spoiler review. Some of you may be familiar with this film, some of you may not be. I certainly hadn't heard of this film until the theater that I worked at told me that we were going to be getting an advanced screening of it. The film is starting to get a lot of buzz on social media, and as is always the case with these type of horror films, it's particularly getting the type of buzz where people are coming on and being like, this is the best scary movie in years, the scariest movie since The Exorcist. You know, all that stuff that we usually see come up on social media anytime a new horror film is released. And I feel like I should know better by now to fall into the hype, but I went into this movie really excited with really high expectations. It was getting a lot of good buzz coming out of film festivals and other preview screenings. And overall, I would say I liked the first half of the film. You have the protagonist, Georgina Campbell, who one night arrives to this Airbnb that she rented, and she gets there only to find that there is another renter in the Airbnb, played by Bill Skarsgård. There's a lot of confusion as to who's supposed to be at the Airbnb. They're trying to call the owner and get some clarification, and of course the owner is not picking up, so they're just kind of stuck together in this house. And there is a lot of tension that arises from this situation because Bill Skarsgård's character is a little on edge. He seems very nervous. He's very anxious when talking to her. You're never quite sure what his deal is. Is he involved with this mishap? Did he set up this trap for Georgina Campbell's character to fall into? So that's all in the first act, and I feel like the first act is definitely the strongest part of this film. It's definitely the part that I was the most invested in and felt the most creep factor from, and was really curious to see what was going to happen next. The filmmaker also does a good job of setting up that something is just weird with this house. This isn't really a spoiler because it happens at the beginning of the film, but at one point Georgina Campbell's character goes out and takes a good look at the neighborhood that this house is in, and it's completely deserted, right? All of the houses have been like torn down, they're all dilapidated, people haven't been living here for years now. And so that sets up the mystery too, right? Like, why is there just this one house here in this completely deserted neighborhood? Who owns this house? Why is it being rented out for Airbnbs? Like, there's a lot of questions, and I was intrigued by it. And then the first act ends and the second act starts, and for me, that's where the film just fell apart. Overall, I just didn't enjoy watching this movie as much as I hoped I was going to. This film was getting a lot of comparisons to Malignant, which came out last year, and to be perfectly honest, I was not a fan of Malignant either. But at least with Malignant, I will say that it had that James Wan charm to it, right? It did present us with a villain and scenarios that we haven't seen in horror cinema before. And that is not the case here with Barbarian. I felt like this film committed the cardinal sin of horror filmmaking in that it was just kind of boring. When you do find out what or who the main antagonist is here in this movie, the monster of this film, I feel like it's something that we've seen before plenty of other times in other horror films. In fact, there are horror films that have come out just this year in the past couple of months that have a very similar villain to what is presented here in Barbarian. And those films do it a lot better than this one does. I feel like a lot of the shock factor in this film we've seen plenty of times before. If you're a die-hard horror fan and you've seen all the classics and you've seen all the films that have come out in the past 10, 20 years, this film is not offering you anything new. You've seen everything that this film is going to show you already. And that maybe not be such a bad thing if the story was better, but I just found the story to be really clunky. It wants to do that thing where it's like Act 1 is one story, one setting, and then Act 2 is gonna jump you to a different setting with different characters, and then act 3 is gonna try to like bring you back and connect everything together. There's a random flashback at one point. So the narrative feels clunky, it feels all over the place. I was reading an interview with the writer-director who said when he got the idea for this film, it was really just this idea of two people stuck in an Airbnb together. And you can kind of tell because, again, that is the strongest part of the film. Everything that comes after that feels like just some kind of weird add-on. So overall, it just didn't do much for me. The narrative didn't do much for me. The characters didn't do much for me either. We don't really learn too much about the characters. They're not fully developed. And this is just one of those movies where you have characters consistently making stupid decisions and stupid choices. It's one of those films where you have characters that have a very clear pathway to get out of danger, and they just choose not to. They just consistently choose to go into the danger. It's a constant thing of like characters are outside of the house, they escape the house, and then they go back into the house, and they escape the house again, and then they go back in the house, and yeah, it just gets very repetitive after a while. It was one of those films where I'm in the theater, we're in the third act, and I'm just sitting there waiting for it to be over. And that's never a good feeling. Another thing that didn't quite work for me is the humor in this film. This is very much a horror comedy. I believe the writer-director of this film is actually part of a YouTube comedy troupe. And personally, horror comedies don't do much for me. I feel like there are only a few that really do it well, that really know how to blend the horror with the comedy. And I also just didn't find it to be like very clever comedy either. Like, it's the type of comedy where, you know, just for example, you have a character coming in and they say to another character like, oh, it's okay, like, I'll protect you, like, nothing bad ever happens to me. And then like 2 seconds later, something terrible happens to them, right? It's like that kind of humor. I guess it's like YouTube humor in a way. Maybe you're into that and you would enjoy it. For me, that's just not my type of humor, so a lot of it just fell flat for me. There's also one character in this film that's trying to be the comic relief, and if you're aware of the cast list, you can probably take a guess as to who this is. But my problem with that character is that they set him up in a way that he's just this really terrible character, right? They hint off right when you meet him that he's done something really terrible to another person. And so it's just kind of weird that the film is introducing you to this guy as this creep kind of douchebag character, but then he's going to be the comic relief and you're supposed to laugh with him. It was just really hard for me to laugh with this character or even at this character, knowing that he was a terrible person. Like, I don't know, it just felt a little odd. And another thing I want to point out, because I'm seeing a lot of hype for the marketing of this film, they've released a couple of posters which have a very 80s feel to it. This film is not a film that's trying to recreate the 80s or the 70s. It's not a Ty West movie. There is a flashback to the 1980s, but it's pretty quick and the aesthetic isn't really there. Like, it's not trying to give you a 70s or 80s aesthetic. So if you're going into this movie hoping that that's what you're gonna get, excited that that's what you're gonna get, the film's not gonna give you that. So yeah, overall, this film just didn't do much for me. I don't know that I would recommend seeing this in the theater. I would probably say wait for it to come on streaming. And again, I feel shitty saying that, but that's just my opinion. That's the experience that I had with this film. I know a lot of people are coming out of this film and saying that they liked it. Some pretty prominent names are coming out and saying that they enjoyed the film. So it's entirely possible that you will go into this movie and enjoy it, especially if you were someone that enjoyed kind of the craziness of a film like *Malignant*. You'll probably find something here to enjoy. Again, for me, I don't feel like this film was quite on the same level that *Malignant* was. And I do feel like it's very repetitive in just the horror and the scares that it's giving you. But yeah, I wish I had enjoyed it more. It's always such a bummer when you walk out of these movies and you just didn't like it. And I feel like I've been doing that a lot in the past few years with the horror films that have been coming out. And yeah, it's just a really sucky feeling. I didn't even watch any of the big horror films that came out in August because they all just looked so bad and they weren't getting good reviews, and yeah, I don't know what's going on with these studios, and I don't know who they're making these movies for. They're just throwing in these like social commentary messages, and there's no story. And this film, Barbarian, does that as well. Like, it's commenting on certain social issues for some reason. It comments on them and then it drops them. It only brings them up when it's like necessary to help move the plot forward. But yeah, I'm just really over all of that. And I would say that if you're interested in seeing this film, maybe lower your expectations going in. But I always feel like that's such a cop-out. Like, as audiences, we shouldn't have to be lowering our expectations to enjoy a movie. These studios need to be doing better. Anyway, that's my rant. Again, maybe you'll like this movie more than I did. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.